This is in large part associated with a book published in 2019 by Ruby Warrington called Sober Curious, and then she has a subtitle which promises various things that you will kind of derive more freely or more abundantly from life as a result. And so, like, you know, we start with the health things that we've identified.
Yeah.
First thing that people think of is hangovers. I think the next thing that people probably think of is sleep, you know, quality of sleep, but then also concentration, general sickliness. When you get to really problematic consumption of alcohol, then we're talking about like liver problems, and we're talking about the general degradation
chemical
of your
dependency.
health. Yeah, chemical dependence, alcoholism, etc.
Yeah.
But I think like a lot of us, you know, especially people who are somewhat conscious of their own fragile or volatile mental health, will notice changes when it comes to like anxiety, depression, mood swings, things like that. So I haven't had alcohol in like 2 years, and the reason for which is just it makes me so moody. Like I would say, like I don't tend to run sad, but I run a little sad. But when I drink alcohol, I run sad.
Yeah.
Which is just like devastating to feel oneself on the verge of tears up until the moment where you go to sleep and wake up somewhat refreshed, but maybe not. And so like for me, it was just a kind of question of, you know, physical, mental health, and like whether or not that were the type of choice that could be integrated in a human community. And so it's fascinating the way that the movement is billed as Sober Curious. It's funny. I don't know that I necessarily take it as lack of commitment. My suspicion is that it might be a kind of, I suppose evangelical is the wrong word, but it might be a kind of pedagogical approach.
Okay.
Because in the past, I think a lot of, so when you talk about sobriety, you're talking typically about chemical dependence.
Yes.
You know, so it's like this person has a problem with alcoholism. He may have gotten in touch with the 12-step program, and then now he's working the steps, and the only way in which for him to be free is through sobriety. You know, you could talk about dry drunks, or you could talk about whatever, but like the only way in which for him to be free is total sobriety. So no non-alcoholic beers less than 0.5%, no kombucha, you know, no Sudafed, you know, just like sobriety. So that would be total abstinence. Whereas here, I think that the idea with Sober Curious is like, let me kind of experiment with my use of alcohol, more or less, maybe none, but to make a determination as to, am I dependent upon it? Do I see it as absolutely necessary for social interaction? Is it the type of thing around which a lot of other anxieties cluster? So I think it's like you kind of go into your own life as like a psychologist / sociologist.
Ooh.
And I think like this idea of curiosity is that you're trying to be even-handed with your own experience, so that way you don't prejudge it, but can just judge it. And then when you judge it, then be honest about what you find so that you can kind of adjust accordingly. I don't know how much people are actually doing that, but it strikes me, yeah, especially when like a lot of the language around sobriety comes from religious movements, which were really heavy-handed, often puritanical, you know, temperance movement and stuff like that. I think that there's a big push against certain elements of that culture because they're judgy, or they're seen as judgy, and they don't really have a real sense for the place that alcohol occupies in human culture. Father Bonaventure, if you had to choose between getting Warby Parker glasses, subscribing to a YouTube channel, or flossing your teeth, what would you choose?
Oof. I guess, to be honest, subscribing to a YouTube channel.
See, folks, it's not as bad as flossing your teeth or getting Warby Parker glasses. Please subscribe to Godsplaining. Cheers.